Homage to the Triple Gem. So hello everybody, this is Bhante Joe here, and I've come down here to Colombo, to Bhattaramula, after having spent a very nice 4 months at Gendagala Aranya, and thought to record a Ovāda for the internet, excuse me. So when I was a young man, I started in the Zen tradition. And the Zen tradition is one that emphasizes spontaneity quite a lot. So you'll go into these interviews with the teacher, and you'll sit in front of the teacher just like a few feet away, and then he'll ask you to show him your practice. You have to kind of show your understanding of Zen. Zen kind of has this very strong emphasis on spontaneity because it's seen to be that spontaneity comes from a place of emptiness. So if you're coming from a place of emptiness and you can respond to certain challenges that are placed to you through emptiness, then the teacher will be able to recognize whether or not your response is coming from that place, and that will be something that they can use to either confirm or deny your enlightenment. So, of course, this is not necessarily like some kind of fail-proof method. It's something that's very useful. It's a very useful skill in terms of knowing how to respond appropriately in the moment. But I remember sometimes I would be in those, I would think about this kind of emphasis on spontaneity, and I'd be, well, I don't know if every single arahant would be able to answer these questions. But it does make certain good points. And actually, this is the second time I've recorded this video on spontaneity. Recorded it just earlier. But this is the second time around. So regarding spontaneity in the Theravada tradition, it's not exactly the same as Zen. There isn't this kind of emphasis that all kind of arahants should be coming from this place of emptiness or so, with every action that they take, with every move that they make, etc. And so that one can test that by seeing if they understand certain paradoxes. In Theravada Buddhism, most of the what you might call like compounded qualities that one sees, qualities that require the development of a skill, these qualities are things that are relating to the path, the Noble Eightfold Path. And the Noble Eightfold Path is said to be the foremost of compounded things, but it's still compounded. It's still not something that is unconditioned. It's conditioned, and it's something that has to be developed. So this spontaneity is something that can be developed as a skill. It's one of the things that one notices if one goes to enough of these interviews, if one practices in Zen long enough, then it's a language. The way that one acts in situations non-verbally, according to the moment, is a language. It's a non-verbal language. And that language can be learned. It can be developed as a skill, although not necessarily a rational one, an intuitive skill. So this intuitive skill involving spontaneity, staying in the present moment, coming what you might call from the place of emptiness or so, a non-pre-thought, predetermined place, this kind of skill has its role in the Theravada tradition as well. And in the Theravada tradition, this role can be broken down in many, many different ways. It could apply in many different ways, but one can think of at least four, in which it could apply significantly in one's practice. One of these is one's relationships with other people. Another one could say, could be the way in which one solves problems in one's meditation, like solves problems in one's meditation as they arise in terms of dealing with defilements. Another one could be the way that one makes major decisions in one's life. And the last one can be quite important in terms of renunciation, in terms of how to renounce things that come up in one's practice. So in terms of one's relationships with other people, actually, human relationships are things that can't really be pre-planned. I mean, one can have a kind of attitude, like there are many teachings in the canon, that one should relate to people this way, one should relate to them with this type of intention, these are the types of speech that are useful, that are appropriate, these are the types of speech that are inappropriate. They have a lot of teachings on the ways in which it's appropriate to relate to people. So one can have this as a framework, like an overall kind of, an overall ideal, overall principles in terms of relationships with other people, but the actual nuts and bolts of how one interacts on a day-to-day basis with people specifically, those are things which can be quite different. Those are things which require spontaneity. And the reason for this is because people aren't machines. They don't respond to rules necessarily about how they should act, what they should say, what they should do. I mean, some do, but many don't. And the ways in which people develop relationships which are beneficial in terms of the Dhamma, or beneficial in general, is not always something pre-planned that they can know necessarily in the cognitive part of their brain. A lot of what happens in interactions between other people is registered like subconsciously per se. And it's registered on like a moment-to-moment basis and kind of aggregated so that people get a kind of feeling, a kind of intuition, whether they like a person, whether they feel comfortable with a person, whether they want to spend more time with a person or less, what they think that person is like, where they think they're coming from. It's not necessarily like they have this kind of intellectual checklist that they go through and tick all the boxes and then, calculate it rationally using some mathematical formula to come up with a score of whether or not they should meet with them next time or not. It's something that usually happens very quickly. So, because humans aren't this type of animal that has no need to interact with any other animal. They can just go independently and very easily because of the way that their body is constructed, or so they can get by being alone most of the time and just getting what they need from the natural environment. Actually, humans evolved as social animals. They come from monkeys, and monkeys are very, very social. And although it may seem that a person is very independent, almost nothing that a person uses, they make themselves. It all comes from another human, one way or another usually. Wherever the resources were extracted from, wherever the thing was made, whoever engaged in the trade. And so what it means is that as humans, our very lives, regardless of whether a monk, a lay person, whatever, they're dependent on other humans. It's not the type of thing where one is totally independent. And indeed, for monks, the Buddha made it so you couldn't really become some kind of total hermit. There's rules which prevent monks from taking money, handling money, accumulating money, basically. And there's rules which make it so that every time they eat, somebody has to physically offer that food into their hand. So it means you can never get a whole bunch of money in a big store of food and just stay somewhere where nobody knows if you're there or if you're alive or dead or anything like this. There always has to be somebody who cares enough about those things to make sure that they hand you food in the morning every day. And even if one is a lay person, a non-monastic, of course, the more time that one devotes to practice, either one has to have an independent store of wealth, or one will be interacting with other practitioners more. One will be, in some way, connecting more with this network that the Buddha built around the Sangha, around full-time practitioners, which relies on generosity, which is an economy of what they call gifts, where people are free to give. There's no obligation to help, but they help because they want to out of a pure desire, ideally. And the people who practice, there's various rules that the Buddha lays down about you basically can't ask people for help unless they've made an offer. So what it means is that a person's interactions with other people, even in terms of the Dhamma, these become things that carry a significance, because one will be living in a society, one will be living more and more in a situation in which one's interactions with other people play a role in whether or not one gets food, whether one doesn't get food, in whether or not one's meditation practice goes well, whether or not it doesn't go well. And this is probably the most important. But the way that the Buddha lays it down is that one's interactions with other people should basically always be based around the Dhamma. It's kind of, so it shouldn't be based around scheming, hinting, belittling, or pursuing gain with gain. In other words, one shouldn't be thinking as somebody who is either a monk or a lay person devoting more and more time to their practice. Like, how can I get something from this person? One more or less takes care of one's own practice, one's own mind, and interacts with people in ways that are beneficial in terms of the Dhamma, looking for kind of plus one relationships where everybody benefits, where a person gives what they can in terms of what they have, other people give what they can in terms of what they have, if they like, mainly in terms of the Dhamma, and everybody benefits all around. So because people don't have these pre-planned things in their head, one has to, like, I'm going to act this way or this way, and their minds change very, very quickly. In interacting with other people, one has to constantly be evaluating which way is it going. Is this interaction in line with the Dhamma or not? And how can I bring it in line with the Dhamma? And this requires quite a lot of spontaneity, because people's intentions change in real time. They change in terms of stimulus. So it can be the case that an interaction, a relationship, is in line with the Dhamma. It's something that is mutually beneficial. There's various ways that this is laid out for both lay people and monks. So the way that one interacts with one's parents or one's teachers or one's boss or one's friends, or ascetics and Brahmins. And for monks, it's laid out in really great detail, the way you interact with other monks of various roles in your life, your preceptor, people who are junior to you. It's laid out in quite a lot of detail, the interactions that monks have with each other in the Sangha, and the interactions that monks have with laity. The Buddha gives many, many principles for these things. So one always has to evaluate, is this relationship, is what I'm doing here with this person, is this in line with the Dhamma or not? And if it isn't in line with the Dhamma, is there a way that I can fix it? And if there isn't a way that I can fix it, is there a way that I should distance myself from it? And these things occur as evaluations in real time and spontaneously. And it's not always the case. When one likes to put people in these categories, like this person is a good person, this person is a bad person. Or this person is this way, this person is that way. People are not one way or another. They're constantly changing, they're constantly shifting. So what it means is that spontaneity is required not only to judge people's intentions in the here and now, but if a person can act in ways that are particularly skillful, then one can take situations that have potential and grow them into situations that are beneficial in terms of the Dhamma, both for oneself, for others. Beneficial in terms of the support that they give a person for one's practice. So actually, just recently I had this fellow come to stay with me, and it was really nice. He was a really great fellow, really diligent meditator. And we set up a kind of schedule where we would meet twice a day, and it felt like it had a good balance with between solitude and communal activities. And previously, when I've lived with people, or maybe people have come to stay, I always kind of left it pretty spontaneous. When I first came to Sri Lanka, especially, I was really interested in staying alone, so I didn't really want to interact with people that much. But this one seemed to go much better, and it seemed like a really nice support in terms of meditation for everybody, and left that those interactions that we had over the month. It felt like a good momentum for practice, and something that was mutually beneficial. So this spontaneity can be really important in terms of turning situations that we encounter in our life with other people towards the Dhamma, and living them out in ways that are in line with the Buddha's teachings, and kind of not something where one is scheming to get things from other people, but one where one is looking, if one can turn situations in line with the Dhamma, and looking for people who want to have interactions that are in line with the Dhamma. So if that can be done well, it's something very, very beautiful. It's something that's not forced on one, not forced on other people. It's not something that's manipulating to other people. It's not manipulating to oneself. It's something which can be beneficial basically all around, which is the hallmark of the way that the Buddha lays down the Dhamma, something that is well balanced. And to balance things well often requires this intuition, requires this spontaneity in addition to the rational faculty. So another really important way in which spontaneity can come into play in one's practice is in terms of dealing with the defilements that are in one's mind at that moment. The defilements that come into a person's mind, these things often behave in the same ways that people behave or living beings behave. In other words, they don't have this mechanistic aspect necessarily, where it's like you can totally predict the ways in which a particular defilement will arise in the mind, and then the exact way in which it'll be appropriate to counter it. So when I was young, I used to watch these kind of shows like Batman, say, or Spider-Man. And you had the superhero, and then you also had these supervillains. And the supervillains would come again and again. They come several different times during a season sometimes, or over the course of the series of the show. They just keep coming up. And they would, they'd very rarely be killed or die or anything like this. So they kept coming back. And they often had their own agendas. Like each villain had its own particular way of doing things, that the categories in which they would do things were relatively predictable. But the way in which they tried to accomplish that general vision of theirs changed each time. So if you had a villain like the Riddler in Batman, then he would usually have some kind of agenda he was trying to achieve. It was kind of the Riddler. He wanted to do this or that, and he would do it by some maybe enigmatic way. We had these kind of villain in Batman who was like this man made of mud, and he was formerly an actor who got really badly injured, and he always wanted to become like a normal human again. He didn't want to be this mud man. And he'd do all this illegal stuff or terrible stuff to make that happen. So in a similar way, the defilements that arise in a person's mind, they can be seen almost like these cartoon character villains, basically. They have their own agenda. A person has hatred, a person has delusion, a person has lust, a person has this kind of anxiety or worry, a person has sloth and torpor. They have all these various defilements, and they keep coming back with the same agenda, but in different forms. And so what it means is that, like these kind of cartoon villains, Batman couldn't defeat the villain in a new episode the exact same way he defeated them in an old one. We, as people who are practicing to eliminate these defilements from our mind, tend to have to come up with new ways of eliminating them each time they present themselves, a way that's appropriate to the way that they've manifested. So what this means is that particular aspect, that particular way of eliminating these defilements has to be spontaneous, because they're showing what they're doing in the moment. We show what we have to do in the moment. Like a boxing match where you may have practiced the punches, you may have practiced the kicks beforehand, but the way in which you actually punch or kick in the moment depends on what the opponent's doing, how he or she is behaving, what you have to do to defeat them. So this is another way in which spontaneity can be very important in one's meditation life. Another quite important way is in making decisions, like major decisions that arise in a person's life. The rational faculty can collect all these pieces of information, which is quite important, but there are some decisions where it gets down to the wire, and they can be very, very frightening. Actually, a person's practice sometimes ripens, you might say, in decisions that are pretty terrifying, pretty scary. And they're often scary because one is afraid to let go of something that one has been relying on for quite some time, and now it's time for it to go. One can't hold on to it any longer. So in these decisions, the rational mind, being hijacked by fear or whatever it might be, comes up with all kinds of reasons why one shouldn't do X, Y, or Z. And some of those reasons might actually be good. Oh, wait a minute, don't do this because it's a danger. Fear, a person has to listen to fear to know if what it's saying is accurate or not. But what it is, again, that can really fine-tune and divide that line is this kind of spontaneous faculty, this faculty that in the present moment tends to know this is the right way to go. One of the really common ways that this can arise can be with, should I ordain or should I not ordain? Should I become a monk or a nun or not? We're kind of thinking about this, especially if one has spent a lot of time building a life and the life is going well, and one starts saying, well, maybe I should ordain. The rational mind will come up with things like, this is not the right time to ordain. You should do it later on. This isn't a very good time right now. Do it later. And it'll keep coming up with that excuse forever. But there can be a point where one lets things go, and an intuition comes up, now is the right time for you to go. Now is the right time for you to ordain. And if one doesn't follow that intuition, it'll be submerged. And what tends to happen is, later on, 4 or 5 months later, the thought will come up again, but it'll be less strong. And it'll be almost like that intuition was an anomaly. One can almost forget about it, but it's there, that was the right time, that one should do this. If one pays attention to those intuitions in these major decision moments in one's life, often that intuition gives the best answer of the way that one should go forward. But the tricky thing about it is that one sometimes actually doesn't know the answer until one gets to that point. It's not like one can think, oh, I want to ordain, what's the exact plan that I should have, and let me just check my intuition. And the intuition says, like, right there, okay, you're going to do step A, step B, step C, step D. Intuition often arises more like a go or no-go thing. Like, it's like a one-liner, like this way, do this or do this. And to get to that point, one has to keep taking steps in the face of quite a lot of fear sometimes, until one is at the crossroad and literally almost taking the next step over into the crossroad. It's like almost before one's foot lands, that sometimes this spontaneous knowledge or intuition can arise that this is the right road to take. So spiritual life or any major decision sometimes can be like this. It's not something that can necessarily be pre-planned. One has to keep going towards it with quite a lot of bravery, walking in the face of this fear and not really knowing when the answer will come or if it will come. And it's kind of, sometimes it comes in a really strong way, just, the very, very last step that one is taking when one's foot is about to land in what seems like thin air. Suddenly one sees, oh, beneath this cloud I thought was thin air, there's a place for me to place my foot. I should place it here. And that can be how it operates. And some of the most important decisions in a person's life can gain clarity through this spontaneity in the present moment when one is kept going forward, despite the fears, despite the worries, and despite whatever the rational mind throws up. So this kind of combines, it's a way in which the rational mind throws up fears and things like this, the way in which one can make decisions, but it's also an aspect of the way that one renounces things. A lot of these things that bring up fear have to do with renunciation. And the path leading forward in terms of Buddhism is a path through renunciation. It's one of the interesting things about Buddhist practice that it can start where people think to themselves, I've got this suffering, I've got these problems in my life, I want to find a way to reduce these problems. And so one goes forward trying to reduce those problems. But in trying to reduce them, one sometimes finds that, this is great, I'm getting more things, a person's relationships are getting better, whatever it is, they're getting healthier, they're able to stop junk food, and their life improves. But then one starts to see that actually the road that one's meditation practice is going along is not a road that leads to greater and greater worldly accumulation. At a certain point, that road goes into one's life and then goes out the other end of it. And when it starts to go out the other end of one's life, that's when it gets pretty frightening. It's kind of, oh, wait a minute, in order to go forward, I'm talking about intuitions and major decisions, it's like, well, I've got to let go of this. But I thought this was something fundamental that I really, really cared about. I thought this was something that I really, really needed, and I didn't want to let go of it. I wanted to keep that. So sometimes people in their practice come up with all these plans, I'm gonna practice this way and this way and this way, and they come up with plans for how they're going to achieve noble attainments, and they have all these preconditions for what they're going to do. I want to get this noble attainment, but to get it, I don't want to give up my job, or I don't want to give up my husband or wife, I don't want to give up my kids, I don't want to give up anything. I just want to have this kind of noble attainment, but keep everything that goes along with it. So there was somebody who actually asked me a question via Discord the other day, which was, is it possible for anagamis to have a regular career like a layperson? And if a person comes up with this idea that, well, an anagami, they don't need to become a monk, there are anagamis that live in the world, even in the Buddhist time. And so I'm just going to keep doing the exact same things that I've been doing all along. And, practice a little bit and figure that will eventually allow a person to reach anagami. So that's not really the way that practice works. The way that practice works can be a lot like in Canada, we have these very deep lakes. And the lakes can be quite silty. They're freshwater lakes, they're not salt, so there's things living in them, and they're quite organic. So the water can have quite a lot of silt. And there's a very funny thing with the way that one dives. I used to like to do this kind of diving in these lakes when I was a young man. And as one dives and goes forward, one can see usually 3 feet in front. And then when one looks back, one can see all the way. But when one gets another 3 feet, then another 3 feet of visibility opens up in front of one. So one goes another 3 feet and another 3 feet of visibility. But one can't actually see where one is going. It's like dark. The lake is almost often dark because of the ability of light to penetrate, because of the adjustment of one's eyes, and because of all this kind of silt that's there. It's this very strange effect. But whenever one looks back, one can see right to the top of the lake where one dived from. So progressing in one's practice can be quite similar to this, in that one doesn't necessarily know what the next 3 feet in front will be. One can get a general plan for the next 3 feet, but the next 3 feet after that is a mystery. There's a big question mark hanging over top of it. So in order to navigate this well, it requires spontaneity. As one approaches the end of that 3 feet, that's when the next 3 feet opens up. And oftentimes going forward, the next 3 feet, what's required to go forward the next 3 feet is to let go of something that one had been holding on to. Basically, all these defilements, all these things that cause us to suffer, are related to something that a person likes. They're related to something that a person is attached to. So if a person wants to get rid of their suffering, they have to let go of something that they like, usually. And just kind of compare that to like a rocket that kind of goes up and has to let go of its boosters. Or maybe like another metaphor. It could be like a person, imagine a person going into, say, like a big cathedral or so. And, if they want to go in there and they are carrying all this different luggage, 4 or 5 bags and different things like this, and they go through this big cathedral door that's open, they can go through that. But if they want to keep going and there's smaller doors ahead, then in order to go through that at one time, they can't take their luggage at once. They have to let the luggage go. Or like a monk who goes on tudong, as they travel, the further that you want to travel as a monk, the less stuff you can carry. I mean, if you start off with all these big suitcases, you're going to get tired and you're not going to go very fast. So you have to let them go. You have to jettison them. And then as you go along, you might have to let go of more. I mean, until you realize that basically all you're carrying might be just your basic necessities, the things that you need to survive. So practicing in terms of the Dhamma is similar. The road goes through one's life, but as it keeps going, one realizes there's things in one's life that one has to let go if one wants to be happy. And these are the very things that have been causing a person to suffer all along. And it's often the spontaneity in the moment that gives one the bravery to make that step, to take that step, because pre-planning it out, I'm going to do this at this time, person wants to become like an anagami, or they're thinking they have the anagami as their goal, but they don't want to change anything in their life. Or they have all these different preconditions on what they're willing to do to become an anagami. That is not a good attitude to have in terms of moving forward in one's practice. Moving forward in one's practice, one almost has to develop this attitude that whatever it is that I have to let go, I'll let go of it. At the right time, when it seems like the right time. And when the door becomes too narrow for me to carry these bags, if I want to go through that door, then I have to let these bags go. If I want to see the next 3 feet in front, then I have to let these things go. So the rational mind thinking about these things will churn up endless excuses about why it's so terrifying, etc. But the bravery that one gets to do this can often occur in that moment by having faith that this is a process, this is a path that leads in a good direction, and not allowing oneself to think about the future too much, so that it's basically a spontaneous thing. And one is going forward, and the knowledge comes up, or the intuition comes up, I have to let go of this. Then letting go of it is something that one does by stepping forward in the present moment. Not thinking too much about the future, not thinking too much about the past, and relying on one's intuition to take that step to go through the next door and see what's beyond there. So spontaneity, although it's not the same in Theravada Buddhism as it is in Zen, it actually does have quite a significant role. It ties in with intuition, which is one of the faculties that's really important for balancing things, fine-tuning things, whether it's a relationship, whether it's deciding exactly what the right way to direct one's mind is to eliminate a defilement, whether it's deciding whether or not to, how to make these major decisions in life. And perhaps most importantly is to give one the bravery, to have one's mind on an even keel, to allow it the sense of confidence that comes from a kind of unknowing, from a kind of emptiness, to step forward and let go of some of the things that one cherished the most, because these are the things that have been causing one to suffer all along, and the path to a true happiness comes from removing them. So spontaneity is something that does have this very important role as well in Theravada Buddhism. And it's a quality, it's a conditioned quality, it's part of the Noble Eightfold Path that can be developed through practicing it, through developing it, through learning to rely on it. And that's a spontaneity, although it's conditioned, can set one's feet on the path towards something that is not.